Before we dive in, here's another show you can enjoy in the True Story FM family of entertainment podcasts.
In a world where podcasts are a dime a dozen, one show dares to stand out from the rest.
The Film Board, a podcast unafraid to tell it like it is.
We're here for one reason and one reason only. Downloads.
That's right. We review new release movies because that's what gets people's attention.
But just because we're in it for the clicks doesn't mean we don't take our job seriously.
We're part of the Next Reel family of film podcasts, and we're proud of it.
Our reviews are just as insightful and thought-provoking as any of our other film podcasts.
It's just that this podcast is all about that sweet, sweet SEO.
The nectar squoze from the tree of Bing.
We're only human, but we're also creators.
And creators eat clicks to survive.
So if you want honest, unfiltered opinions on the very latest movies right on opening weekend,
delivered with the self-awareness of a team looking for downloads,
then tune in to The Film Board,
where every download counts, but yours counts the most.
Do you like movies?
Do you like sports?
I never played that sport on the screen, but I really enjoyed how the movie made me feel.
Well then, have we got a show for you. The Adrian Moment is where my friend Ocean and I discuss the triangulation of sports, movies, and life.
We dive deep into the movies, discussing how they relate to and have affected our lives.
We will talk about why the sport matters to the movie, why you don't have to love the sport to enjoy the movie, and mine a few nuggets of meaning inside the story you may not have realized was really there.
After listening to our show, come join us for more conversations about the movies that portray the thrill of victory
and the agony of defeat.
Find the Adrian Moment podcast on your favorite podcast app and join us while we cover the sports you love and the ones you never think about.
You will never see sports or sport movies the same again.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Superhero Ethics. The Penguin was a show that caught a lot of people by storm, was really popular when it came out, and raised all sorts of great questions. Due to the thankless task of flying halfway around the world, Riki has watched all of it in one plane flight. I watched most of it when it came out, and today we are going to be talking about that show starring Colin Farrell and Cristin Milioti. So, right off the bat, for those who haven't seen it, there will be some spoilers in this, including a big spoiler at the end. So, if you haven't watched it, definitely recommend hitting pause, watch it. It is phenomenal. Or just being comfortable being spoiled, because there's a big twist at the end. Riki, overall, what'd you think?
Well, I also want to say it's Cristin Milioti.
Oh, thank you.
Much more Italian sounding name, fittingly. Mm-hmm. What did I think of this show? I'm going to start going into it. I wasn't that excited.
Uh-huh.
But when you're flying to Japan from California, you have like a 10-hour flight and you need stuff to watch. And I was like, oh, it's like barely going to fit into the flight. So yeah. I was like, it is superhero adjacent. So I decided to watch it. And not only I would say I was pleasantly surprised, I was blown away.
Yeah.
And I knew going in, like, it was very critically acclaimed and people loved it, but I didn't dig too deep into why. Mm-hmm. And absolutely, like Colin Farrell, the performance of his lifetime up to now, I would say. I think he's been winning awards for it, rightfully so. The makeup is obviously like you can just look at it and tell or not tell that it's him and be like, what? But his acting too, like, sells the role. It is not just the makeup that makes him disappear. Like, he himself disappears into this performance.
He really does.
As the Penguin. And then the opposite him, Cristin Milioti, who most people probably know as the mother from How I Met Your Mother. Kind of a thankless role, the way that show was set up, and it has nothing to do with her or how she portrayed the role, but I would say maybe she is as good or even better here than Colin.
I think so, yeah.
And just like the two of them together, it was so electric. And then, as you said, the ethical questions and considerations of this, given that it's basically a mob story, it's like, well, there's a lot of crime going on,
right?
But within timing, there's some interesting things to discuss, right?
For sure. And just to further set the scene, for those who haven't seen the show, the character is the same one that was set up in the Matt Reeves
The Batman.
Robert Pattinson movie, The Batman. The Penguin is a small character in that, but one that really kind of caught a lot of people's eye because Colin Farrell was so good in it and the makeup was so good. And so they gave him the spin-off show, and it is all taking place in the world immediately following that movie, where there's been massive disruption because of all the events that happened in that movie and things like that. And one of the things that happens in that movie is the fall of the leader of one of the major crime families in town, the Falcones. And now the show is mostly about kind of the various groups attempting to fill the vacuum for that. And
Yeah,
go
I
ahead.
just want to comment on the movie The Batman.
Uh-huh.
Also surprisingly good, given like Robert Pattinson, people were skeptical of. I thought he
Yep.
gave a great performance. The movie kind of sets up a no man's land situation from the comics where
Mhm.
Gotham City falls to, I think in the comics it's an earthquake and is cut off from the rest of the country, and it devolves into like fiefdoms of gangs controlling the
Right.
city. And Batman is like slowly helping the Gotham Police Department take the city back from these gangs, and there's like no outside support. It
Right.
it doesn't quite go that far in the movie and the Penguin, but I think it's definitely like the inspiration for what is
Yeah,
happening here.
definitely. And it's a really interesting story. In this is kind of a leap, but I think there's some connections here. The story that they're kind of telling is kind of a microcosm of what we saw happen in Iraq, where Saddam Hussein was clearly horrible and terrible, but of course all the reasons we went into that war, based on lies, etc. The point though being that when he fell, there was anarchy and chaos because there was no sort of situation set up to what happens next. And we're kind of seeing a similar thing here in the underworld of Gotham. And this has often been one of the questions is it better to leave someone in control who is horrible and terrible and doing all these bad things, or to, cut off the head of the snake and but then deal with all of that, the consequences of that. And that I think part of, the movie is about that decision. And I don't think there's any a moment in the show where we're thinking it was the wrong decision, but it definitely is reminding us like, yeah, arresting the head of one crime family does not by any means deal with that issue. Like the whole crime family is still there, all their operations are still there. It just means now there's a lot more fighting to see who takes it over.
Yeah, and spoilers. I mean, this spoiler's obvious, but the Penguin takes over because it's his show.
Yeah.
And it brings to light like how many shows are there where the protagonist is a bad guy or like a
Yeah.
villain, right? A super villain like from the comics, but he's been toned down a lot in the past 30 years to
Mhm.
be like this more mob based, like not not
Yeah.
not as super villainy,
Right.
I'd say, compared to like a Joker.
And I think that kind of fits the first with the Christian Bale movies, but then even more so with Matt Reeves, we're making it much more of this is a detective with a lot of fancy toys rather than there being anything kind of supernatural or mystical happening in this, even with his villains. And you're right, here with the Penguin, uh, among other things, like there was often a lot of kind of anti-Semitism in some of the portrayals of him before, especially with long nose and stuff like that. That's all been cut away. But even looking at like the Danny DeVito kind of portrayal of him being like born with like webbed hands and webbed feet and having this kind of ability to communicate with penguins and being this kind of like different kind of human mutant type thing, all that's cut away. This is a guy he has a limp that makes him kind of waddle, and he had because of a bad leg, and but he's a normal human being who's a mobster. And I really do like that because you're right. I think this show is kind of unique in that, not completely. I think like Breaking Bad is maybe one of the best um, connections to it, one of the best similar things to it, or The Sopranos, in that because a lot of times a mob show is, well, this person wants to make it better. Like Michael Corleone, who always wanted to fix the family and take them legitimate, or other people who are like where the hero is someone who's infiltrating the mob, but maybe gets like pulled into it. Luke Cage in season 2 becomes a lot of that. This is just
Mm.
a straight out mobster, and we kind of learn, like, at first he appears as a sympathetic mobster where he's being bullied and he's got this really horrible relationship with his mother, and there's all these things set up to make you feel bad for him. And one by one, those are kind of stripped away as you realize this guy's been kind of an ethically a monster since he was a kid, including allowing one of his brothers to die. Was it one or two of his brothers?
Both of them.
Yeah, both of his brothers to die so that he could get more of his mother's love. And yes, the kids had been bullying him a little bit, and that's not great. But it's clearly like, no, like at first it seems like it was a terrible accident because he was trying to just get justice for bullying them, and no, it's eventually revealed like he is a monster. He killed his brothers at a young age, and part of why his mother's always treated him so bad is because she knows this.
Yeah, and to be clear, like the killed, he did not personally like murder them.
Right.
He tricked them into like this underground tunnel and then locked the door behind him. And it was raining at the time, so it could be argued that he didn't know that they would die, but he
Right.
definitely like trapped them in a really bad place
Right.
and just like lied to his mother about where they were.
Yeah, even if his original intent wasn't to kill them, certainly when people were like, they could die if we don't find them, where are they? And yeah, as you said, he lied and he said he had no idea.
And I want like he's lying to himself, right? Like psychologically, like he is in such a state of denial that he doesn't
Mhm.
believe that he did these things, at least like to the audience, and like he never admits it.
Yeah. I think that's one of the things that kind of left open. And again, I don't want to. Even as I was hearing myself say that, I wanted to back off it a bit because I think the idea of like, people are just like good people or monsters is not applicable. And an 8-year-old who's doing those terrible things, like that comes from somewhere. And, those people can still be rehabilitated or saved when it's happening at such a young age, but sometimes not. And yeah, obviously there's just so much complexity to that relationship that I feel like I don't know if he's lying to himself or if he just doesn't quite like accept the consequences of what's happening or what. And I think that's very intentionally left vague. And I kind of love that. And I think it's probably going to be explored further in later seasons. But because right now, yeah, I don't know if he was, as you said, kind of lying to himself or kind of thinking, well, they deserve this, but I'm sure eventually that someone will find them and they'll be okay. Or if he really was setting out to be like, I am going to kill these people so that I have more time with my mother.
Yeah. And I agree with what you said that the show is presenting him in a way that they kind of do the seesaw act of
Hmm.
like, is he sympathetic? Is he not? I mean, in the first episode, he straight up murders Alberto Falcone, who is like the nominal heir to the
Right.
Falcone crime family, and does it in a very cold-blooded way. Like they are having like a friendly drink, and then I think Alberto insults him, and he just like doesn't even say it, just pulls out his gun and shoots it, right? Like,
Yeah.
and it's done in a way that's like, oh yeah, this is the character.
Right.
This is who the penguin is, or Oz.
I,
I like that, by the way, that first off they drop the cobble pot. His last name is Cobb.
yeah.
And then most of the time his first name is still full name is Oswald, but most people just call him Oz. And it was like a nice change of pace, I felt like,
Right.
to make him a little more grounded and real, because oftentimes comic book characters have names that are a little out there.
Right. And the Cobblepot often is connected to him, the idea of him being born to very rich parents. And they've kind
Mhm.
of gotten rid of that entirely.
Yeah.
I will say just on the with Alberto, what's the son's name again? It's Albert?
Alberto. Yeah.
Alberto, thank you. He doesn't just insult him once. He's really berating him and kind of like attacking everything about him. And I think it's the perfect seesaw moment because we are supposed to feel so sympathetic for him. He's being bullied, he's being badgered, he's being treated like he's absolutely nothing. And you're kind of like, yeah, if you were like to smack this guy across the face, oh my God, he just killed him.
Yeah, I
Like
think
it's
that's
that very like,
that was the surprise. It was like because you again, like the premise of the show, you understand like he's going to take over. He's probably
right.
going to kill most of these people, and you're like, oh, like how is he going to get? Oh, he just did it now. It
Yeah.
was like the feeling of it, and that's the interesting thing is like he's very impulsive in that
Yeah.
way. He does this multiple times, And it's really like his silver tongue, like his talking, that gets him out of it. Like he
Right.
talks his way out of so many situations. And that too is like a contrast to many other villains and or heroes, right? Who use their
Mhm.
powers, their
Right.
superpowers to get out of situations. I guess his superpowers is talking.
Yeah, he doesn't have super strength, he doesn't have swimming ability, all he has is, like, charisma 21 and advantage on, like, deception and persuasion rolls. And I feel like the thing with him is that they keep making him sympathetic, but then having him overreact to what you think would be expected, because even when his brothers get locked up and then die through his actions, I remember that the kind of the way that scene starts is that the 3 of them are going out to play. I think they're playing hide and seek, and the 2 of them hide in an area that's really hard for him to get to because I think he has a brace on his leg. And I remember, particularly as a disabled person, feeling this incredible rush of sympathy for him, that these kids were kind of being jerks because they're actually he says, like, "Look, I can't climb down to find you." And they say, "No, you have to," even though it's difficult and dangerous for him. And I felt so sympathetic for him. And because the kids are kind of being little shits and the way kids are. And but they don't deserve to die for that. And so when he first locks them in, it's kind of like, yeah, okay, that's fair. Like, give them a dose of their own medicine. Let them, have to be trapped for a little while, and then of course go let them. Okay, well, you're gonna go let them out now, right? Or okay, it's raining now. You're gonna go let. No, nope. He's killing them.
Yeah.
That's what I kept feeling is like his initial reaction is justified, but then he goes so much further than you're thinking.
I don't know about justified, but relatable. I
Yeah,
definitely like there's a ladder he can't get down and he like spots them with his flashlight and he's like, that's good enough, right? Like I caught you with the light beam, I
right.
think is the phrase or something. And like, no, you gotta come down here. It's like, but I can't. Yeah.
Yeah,
So it is relatable to have an emotional outburst, I think.
yeah,
But then it is his I don't know, the calculated way that afterwards, like he doubles down on it or just like continues on that path is what makes him a monster in this case.
yeah.
Not maybe not a murderer, but responsible for their deaths.
Well, and let me ask more about that because if I remember, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we had discussed the show when I was watching it, and you had said one of the reasons you weren't interested in it is that generally you don't love shows that are just about, bad people where there isn't really a hero figure.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and
I mean, you mentioned Breaking Bad. Like I've never been interested in watching Breaking Bad
yeah,
for that reason. And it's part of it is the main character. Like I know enough about him. Like I've seen stuff, and like the crime aspect. So
hmm,
yeah, I would say like this one, what kept me hooked was honestly the character of Victor,
yeah,
who
say
we
more.
haven't talked about, but is essentially his protege, right? And
Yeah,
kind of becomes like an adopted son figure in this
hmm.
story. And I
And Vic,
love. Go ahead.
Victor is someone who he finds because there's a couple of people who are robbing his car, just like like stealing the hubcaps, because this is kind of just a pretty bad neighborhood right now. And he responds by shooting them. And I don't remember if he actually kills any of them or if he just drives them off, or he definitely wounds a couple. But
I don't
one,
think he hits any of them. He shoots at them, ends up hitting his own car, which
yeah,
like, is mentioned later.
he
I
definitely puts
don't.
a hell of a lot of fear into them.
Yeah,
And Victor is the one who doesn't get away. And Victor has a very bad stutter at this point, and I think is otherwise like he's kind of the runt of the group. And I think Penguin really sees both. He kind of is like has the kind of like I've survived this, and I'm mad at you that you're not surviving this, but also a lot of sympathy for him. And it builds this really interesting connection where Penguin is both like bullying the hell out of this kid and threatening his life, but also, as you said, kind of making him a protege and turning him into like a mini me.
yeah, and I love the parallel of their introduction. At least to me, like I read it as a parallel to Batman and Robin,
Yeah.
Jason Todd Robin, who is trying to steal the Batmobile or steal his hubcaps or something, his
Uh-huh.
rims, and that's how they meet. And so, like when I saw that, I was like, oh yeah, this is cute.
Yeah. It's very much kind of like the mirror universe version of that.
Yeah. And I just want to acknowledge Victor Aguilar is the character's name, played by Renzi Feliz,
Yeah.
and does a pretty good job. Like not a standout, but again, when you're up against these superstars giving amazing performances, like he is never distracting. and
Yeah.
he's good for this role.
Yeah. I think he's still pretty young. I think the actor was like probably like around 18. He might have been 17, might have been like more like 19. But actually no, forgive me. He's a good deal older. He's 27, but he looks a lot younger. But he's someone who, like, if you told me he was, I agree that he wasn't the standout actor of this by any means, but if you told me he was in something, that would make me want to watch it. Like, I definitely feel like I want to see what this kid can do.
And you mentioned his stutter, and I thought one of the best scenes in the show, there's a lot of great ones, but one of the best scenes to me was when Penguin takes him to a fancy restaurant
Mm-hmm.
and they're ordering their food, and he's stuttering because he's very nervous, like he's never been in a setting like this, and the waiter interrupts him and like finishes his sentence for him, like the order. He's like, oh, you want this, and the Penguin just snaps and says,
Yeah.
you don't do that, like don't interrupt him, let him finish.
Yeah.
And it is like this bonding moment because the Penguin has a physical disability, and really like emphasizes with Victor's stutter and like wants him to not be put down because of his
Yeah.
disability.
Well, and it's such an interesting moment because if you count the total number of times that Victor is bullied because of his stutter, probably 85% of them are from Penguin himself. And there's
Is
some
it?
degree what it's trying to him trying to help him, like, come on, get over this, and with a tough love approach. To some extent, it's just him being frustrated. But it feels very much that kind of dynamic of like, as your big brother, I get to bully you, but I will protect you like hell from anybody else. You know, and and to me that was a very striking dynamic, and in one that's like fairly toxic, but also makes complete sense for where Penguin is coming from. And you see why it works so much for Victor. Like, not so like all the bullying, but like this moment means so much to him, and his stutter gets better as the show goes on, as he gains more confidence.
I have to say I don't remember that dynamic to them.
Mm.
But like so like this moment stood out, and then I think at the end in the final episode, Victor gives like a full speech, like a rallying speech to the Penguin, like we gotta do this thing and win in the
Right.
end, etc. And he compliments him on it. I mean, he razzes him and he's like, that's this, you memorize that speech, you practice that, like,
Yeah.
but does it in that I'm very proud of you
Right.
fatherly way. And it is it is a complicated relationship for
Mm-hmm.
sure. And there are definitely moments where you think that Oz is gonna kill Victor, including like the very first one, because like that he says he's going to. He's like, hey, like
Yep.
he forces him to help him get rid of Alberto's body.
Right.
And it's like, well, now I gotta kill you because but then decides not to and takes him on as his protege in crime,
Uh-huh.
which is not good, but that is what kept me hooked on this show, was their
Yeah.
relationship. It was strangely heartwarming.
It really was. And I think you're very right that there's a very intentionality about how it mirrors Batman and Robin, especially Jason Todd. And that speech at the end, like, if you take it out of context, this feels like any speech, it feels like Captain America speaking to the Avengers when they're down and broken and being like, no, we need to stop fighting with each other. United, we can do this. But he is talking to a group of people who Penguin has tried to unite to work together for a common cause, and they're all fighting with each other. And he gives this great stirring speech to get them to rally together. The thing is that Penguin wants them to all rally together to be one unified crime organization under Penguin's direct control. And he's rallying them to go and kill people together. And so it's just such a weird moment because it's very much this like heroic moment for a cause that is incredibly unheroic.
Mm-hmm. I have an interesting direction.
Yeah.
I want to take this. Like you mentioned under his control. That I don't know if I would put it that way. Like he definitely wants to be like at the top of something,
Right.
but I don't know that he wants to control everything necessarily. And to me, one of the most interesting threads throughout this show was what I would call crime socialism, if that makes
Yeah.
sense. In that constantly, like, we are being told or shown that like the heads of these families, the Falcones and the Maronis, which are like the two famous crime families in Gotham City, that they control everything, right? And under them is like these whole organizations of mobsters, and they don't get their fair share. And the families at the top are hoarding all this wealth.
Right.
And so when this it's a revolution. This revolution in crime happens. I don't mean like like they're doing something new. Like the people underneath are revolting against the
Right.
top and getting rid of the heads and saying no, like we want our fair share. And
Right.
part of the reason Oz succeeds is like he feeds that message. He
Yeah.
says, you know, like you all are doing the hard work out here of crime and you're not getting your fair share. Like I want us to share the wealth.
Right. He gets like all the second and third in commands to like lop off the head of their own organizations.
Yeah. It's crime socialism.
Yeah. No, I think it's true. And I think, yeah, kind of what he wants is almost kind of a feudal thing where it's like everyone has got to give him respect and like send him a take, but he's not going to be giving them all direct orders. And I think that the idea of respect is really key to this, because that's the thing that drives him again and again, is that he feels like his place and things should be respected. It's when he talks about why he had to kill Alberto, he talks about how disrespected he was and that his value was not being respected. And that's one of the dynamics with his mother, is that his mother is saying to him, like, you have to be respected. You have to earn, you know, your place in the world. And like, you know, earlier I said that we eventually learned that like the reason why his mother treats him the way she does is in large part because she kind of knows that he killed his brothers. That doesn't make the way she treats him good. Like they have a very toxic relationship in both directions. And like to what extent she's pushing him or he's pushing her is very mixed up. But this whole dynamic that he has is that he wants to have his place in the sun. He wants to be respected in that kind of a way. And it's incredibly toxic, but you also see all the way, all the places that it comes from.
Yeah. And there's also like his relationship, not just with the criminal elements, but with the respectful elements of Gotham City, right? He develops this working relationship with, I think it's council member Haiti.
Yep. That sounds right.
Member of the city council, and kind of like blackmail, like forces him to do a thing, restore power to Crown Point, his neighborhood, which has been devastated by the actions of the Riddler in the Batman movie. And he's like, hey, like these people deserve power, like electricity, and gets him to do that. And that's one of the things that Victor cites is like, no one else cared about this neighborhood. You gave them electricity, you gave them dignity, you gave them jobs, criminal jobs, like manufacturing, distributing drugs, but jobs. You gave them jobs, you paid them fairly. And again, like this is what I found very compelling about this show and why I kept watching despite the monstrous acts that the Penguin performs, like in his crime, is that he also did this thing which no one else cared about these people. And it was this element of like, you know, I called it crime socialism, but also this is like he cared about the people.
And I think this is something that can get kind of laughed off, but is actually like something we see all the time in both real life and in other mob stories. Like if you've read the book The Godfather, you know that like the way he comes to prominence in his community is because, you know, the cops and the government have basically written off. They're like, oh, they're just dirty Catholics, they're Italians, they're not good Americans like us. And so he, you know, provides kind of policing, and he provides like community help, and he helps people get, things taken care of that the government should care about. And like that's why, you know, mobsters in New York in the 70s and 80s, when they were getting arrested, like the community loved them. And it's why Pablo Escobar was so popular in parts of Colombia, because, you know, he was doing horrible things, and a lot of his popularity was they would kill you if you didn't like him. You know, he brought government services to lots of people who weren't getting them. And that's true of one of my favorite TV shows, Warrior, talks a lot about how The Tongs were doing that for Chinese immigrant communities in turn of the century California. And so this idea of, it's beneficial to him because it kind of is making him legitimate in the eyes of the community, but it's also helping him build his power base. To me, that feels very real, and I really appreciated that.
Yeah, it is. To me, like I've always liked villains in comic book stories who are complicated because they're villains,
Yeah.
but they are seeking progress, I guess is what I would say. Um and that is what makes the Penguin good. And like so often in these stories, the villains are seeking progress
Right.
in a unhealthy way, or in a way that probably enriches them too much. But like the hero, what makes it interesting is when the hero comes to stop them, the hero
Right.
is fighting for the status quo, which is also perhaps not the most well balanced. And so that's why like villains like this are compelling, because they are he's fighting for himself and his own wealth and enrichment, but you can see the
Right.
elements where it's like, yeah,
Yeah, he's got
the
this
system
underlying
currently is
sense of right and
unfair
wrong,
and should be
and it's a very
changed.
screwed up one. And part of it is that anyone who stands in his way has like lost any moral right to live. But he also has a sense, when Victor is getting treated badly in that restaurant, he's like, no, this is not okay. And similarly, he stands up for other people like that. And I think one of the most interesting things about him is that it, it's easy and it's tempting to try and put people into one of two camps. Either they're moral and good and they're fighting for what's right, or they're only fighting for the good of other people so that they can earn their trust and their adoration, and for all these negative reasons. And I think Penguin is genuinely both. He craves respect, he craves adoration, and helping the people in his community is a great way to get that. And if I remember, also, like, getting the city services turned on in this neighborhood also really helps his drug operation that requires like running water and power in order to like make the drugs that he's trying to make. But also, he does have a sense that this is not okay, that these people should be getting power, and that after a disaster, the idea that city services are mostly helping the rich and the more well off is wrong. And yeah, I think you're right. It's what's compelling about him because he does feel like I have been wronged, and so therefore I want to fight on behalf of everyone else who's been wronged. And that makes you want to root for him until again you realize like he's a murdering bastard. And so it's such a he's such a complex character, and I think that's why we love him so much.
Yeah, I think you're correct. The initial reason is that he and Victor check out like
Yep.
this underground tunnel. Like this would be the perfect place for a
Yeah.
drug operation. But you know what we need? We need electricity. It's like,
Yep.
okay, well, let me go talk to the councilman. And it's also like he's moved his mother to the neighborhood and they don't have power in the apartment, and she's very cold and she wants to listen to her music. So it
Mhm.
is like they portray his motivations as selfish, but the way that it connects to the community,
Yeah.
and then like, yeah, again, like he provides jobs, and
Uh-huh.
for everything we are led to understand, like he pays everyone in his organization a fair wage, and it's like, okay, like you're doing a thing. Like I don't agree with the drug part, but interestingly, like it is also portrayed as like a
Right.
not a bad drug, right? Like I don't want that to come off wrong, but
Yeah, I think it's more like ecstasy than it is like heroin or cocaine. In terms of like it's probably not good for people to be taking regularly, but it's
yeah,
not like
yeah.
leading to the very negative, addiction and death quite as quickly as some of the harder drugs can. It's a party drug.
And interestingly, the origin of the drug is from the system.
Right.
It came from Arkham Asylum, where they were using the drug. They're experimenting on inmates and using it to pacify
Right.
them because of the effects of like ecstasy-like effects of just making them happy and content.
So Arkham is definitely kind of a character in this, as is someone who spent a long time in Arkham, for unfair reasons, as we learn, but has kind of been turned
Oh my
into,
gosh.
the kind of like Arkham can turn you into what you weren't even when you started. Let's talk about Sophia Falcone, who's kind of I think the second main character of this show, primarily an
Yeah.
antagonist, at times kind of a co-protagonist.
Very interesting. So yeah, Sophia Falcone, she later changes her name to her mother's maiden name, Sophia Gigante, played by Cristin Milioti. She's the eldest daughter in the Falcone crime
Mm-hmm.
family. And in the flashbacks, she's shown to be like the competent
Yep.
one. And the father is like, you're gonna take over this empire. Which itself is also progressive, right? Like these these stories and crime families are usually portrayed as very misogynistic and very
Mm-hmm.
patriarchal, and you hand down to the first son. He's like, nah, like I'm not gonna do that. Like you're the good one. You're the one that can handle
Right.
all this. But then we find out that Carmine Falcone, the father, played by the way by Mark Strong, my favorite
Mm-hmm.
Sinestro, because he was the only Sinestro. um, Carmine Falcone has been murdering, I guess,
Right.
prostitutes, right? That he's sleeping with, and actually, like, it comes he murdered his wife,
Right.
Sophia's mother, and then, like, when the investigation into that gets too close, he pins it all on her because she has also been kind of
Right.
investigating and like figuring it out.
And she's importantly the one who discovered the body of her mother.
Yes, yes, and what was it, like, the reporter is talking to her,
Mm-hmm.
is asking her questions, and that leads her to ask questions and, like, investigate, but then I think the crime family murders the
Right.
reporter and pins that on her because they had been in contact, like, it makes it much easier for them to be like,
Right.
"Hey,
And
look,"
again, for people who've seen the
because
movie, this is what Selena Kyle discovers about how Carmine Falcone killed her mother. It's the same thing, and as later revealed,
Hmm,
because of that reason, Selena Kyle and Sophia are cousins because they're for both of them, their father is Carmine, and Carmine killed both their mothers.
yeah. So Sophia gets sent to Arkham because of this, because these crimes have been pinned on her, and it's Arkham Asylum. So you go in a normal person, you come out a little dark and twisted
Yeah.
because they are giving these drugs to the inmates, and they are doing like shock
Mm-hmm.
therapy experiments
They're
on
setting up
them
situations where
with
really
these
like you have to kill someone or they have to kill you.
Yeah, like in the mess hall, the guards are just watching and they're like, "Oh no, like this very violent
Mm-hmm.
inmate who hates you has like gotten loose." And they like force them to have basically a cage match. And it's terrible. Like the portrayals in Arkham, I feel are very accurate to Arkham in,
Uh-huh.
comics, in DC Comics, but I hate
Yeah.
it. And I hate that kind of portrayal of criminal
Mm-hmm.
justice, you know, quote air quotes justice. And she comes out a little unhinged and wants revenge. And it turns out like the person she needs to get revenge on is
Yep.
Oz, the penguin.
Yeah, and it's because he was her driver, he was connected to her, and in some ways he didn't necessarily help the framing, but he didn't stop it either. And there's so much more to the plot that we're not even going to get into. It's a very complex plot. There's a whole sort of sideline where um fighting with the Maroney family, and Clancy Brown plays the head of the Maroney family, and it's just wonderful. And it just like adding this small little detail that his wife is Iranian and Muslim, and that he's picked up some of that. It's just a beautiful part of the story, and I think just the way they let her be like, we've long had the image of the like sexy femme fatale who could kill you, but you might like it. Go back to Star Wars and us talking about Ventress like stabbing someone with her lightsaber and then pulling him close to kiss him. Sophia kind of feels like the actual thing that's inspired by, where she is very deadly, she is very attractive, but she's also not walking around in like, 6-inch dominatrix boots. She looks like a normal person who is just in this place. And I think like Penguin is like originally a product of her circumstances, but also she, like in some ways I think maybe even a lot worse than what he went through, but comes out of it pretty awful and pretty terrible and pretty willing to kill everybody she has to. Um, and I think that there were a couple of moments where they start to team up, and I was really rooting for them, and I wanted them to team up.
But there's
Yeah, they
no
can't because
way because of
they're
what we
both so
know.
distrusting. They're both so focused on like I have to get ahead, and where she has a family that she is so locked into, he's the exact opposite. He is just literally like he's going to be on the side of whoever's holding the gun to his head at that moment.
Yeah, he plays all the
Right.
sides in this story, and it's never made clear like where he's gonna end up. I guess he's gonna end up on
Right.
top, but like, is he gonna collaborate with Sophia? Is he gonna collaborate with Salvatore
Yeah.
Moroni? Like he does at various points, and then when it's inconvenient for him, he drops him.
I want to say the character Sophia Falcone was created by writer The character of Sophia Falcone was created by writer Jeff Loeb and artist Tim Sal, and debuted in 1997's Batman: The Long Halloween.
Yeah,
And I think she was kind of tied in with eventually she was kind of linked to the holiday. I think she was the holiday killer in one version, and in another version she's referred to as the Hangman. And that's in this show she's the press had kind of named someone the Hangman because there's a series of hangings, and then she, as you said, gets framed for that, and so they sort of refer to her as that from the start. And yeah, I really enjoy their antagonism between each other. I know that the show is taking his side, but I think that it also very much like portrays her. Like I think you could have made this exact show with her as the main protagonist, and it'd also be really interesting. And I kind of like wouldn't mind if maybe like the next thing we get isn't necessarily season 2, but the next thing is the Hangman, or like so where we get more of their story and Penguin's the main character, but she's the main point of view character. Because I just think she is another character who's equally as fascinating in how she is monstrous, but also very relatable and very like I support your rights and I support your wrongs kind of a thing.
Yeah, I was gonna say I remember her in The Long Halloween. I believe in that story she is portrayed as like a large woman because like she goes by Sofia Gigante in that, and she's
Okay.
giant. She's like the strong woman. And gosh, like I think the conclusion of that story was that Commissioner Gordon's wife was the holiday killer.
Yes, you're right.
I seem to recall, which is just like a weird that I love that book. But
There's an
it's weird.
animated movie based on the book that Paul and I did a whole review on that you can find earlier in this podcast. So we've not gotten to what is perhaps the most ethically complex and like, oh my God, do I still like this show now? And for a lot of people, it made them all of a sudden stop liking the show, which is what happens at the very end. You want to?
So yeah, funny story about this. You said I watched the whole thing on the flight. I actually barely missed like the last 5 minutes as the plane landed. I was like, well, I got a flight back home, so I'll catch it. And I was like, this is a good show. I enjoyed it, and like the conclusion was pretty good. And then I got on my flight back home, and I actually rewatched the whole final episode just to make sure, I remembered everything. And then the last 5 minutes just like flipped me completely.
So in those last 5 minutes, we have this real kind of heartfelt moment between between Penguin and Victor, in which one of the things he's talking about is how the connections that he has in his life have both really strengthened him, but also that his compassion for them has gotten in the way. And that he's talking here both about his mother, but also the woman he's had a relationship with, where it's like, I think he's paying her to some extent, but also they seem to have to some level care about each other, or at least he cares about her and she pretends to care about him. It's all very complex. But when she realizes that, he's helping this guy who killed a lot of sex workers and other women down, having real troubles, she turns against him and she's ready to work with Sophia against him. And he kind of has this moment of like talking to Victor about how much Victor has helped him, and that, the lesson he's learned from this is that his caring for other people gets in the way. And that was certain that he was able to play upon the loyalties of the various Falcones and the Marconis to get them to help him or to betray them, because this compassion for others is a weakness. And he's teaching this lesson to Victor, and you're getting like, kind of, where is he going with this? Until there's a moment where you realize what he's saying is that he can't do this if he cares about Victor as much as he does, and he kills Victor.
And it's right after Victor says, like, your
Yeah.
family. And you think or hope that Penguin is gonna be like, yeah, like I feel the same
Yeah.
way, and then like have a good heartfelt hug, and then and the show ends, happy ending, and then see you in season 2 where they
Yep.
like crime together again.
And to be
No.
clear, like, Victor saved Penguin's life, and that's part of why he says, "Your family, I did this for you." And so there's this moment where you're like, "Penguin, how stupid are you? Like, you're only alive, you're only successful because of Victor." But 'cause I think the thing is that it's not that Penguin says, "No, what are you, crazy? You're not family." Penguin's saying, "You're right, you are family, and family holds me back."
And that's why, yeah, that's why I have to kill you, because you're a
Yeah,
weakness, you're a vulnerability. And this is actually true, right? In the sense that so many Spider-Man stories, the reason he hides his identity, like he holds it so close to his chest, is that he knows if his identity gets out as Peter Parker, that his family, Aunt May, Mary Jane, or Gwen Stacy, whoever he's dating, like they are a vulnerability, or they become
right.
targets. And in this show, Penguin's Oz's mother became a
Yeah.
target, and she has been debilitated. She's catatonic.
Yeah, she becomes
So he blames himself
she
for
becomes
that,
a
right? To
target,
some
and people
degree.
manipulate him with fear of hurting her. And,
Yeah.
he manipulates Marcone with fear of hurting Marcone's son, and all the Falcones are kind of
Maroni.
driven mad by their own grief about the family. And so, yeah, it's this really powerful moment of, 'cause you're right, it even gives us half of that heartfelt moment, but then this realization of just, no, he can't be this person. And I think if the show had just shown him, like, laughing off, like, "Ha stupid Victor, how could Victor ever think that?" I wouldn't have loved it. What I think I love is that I would guarantee that in season 2, he's gonna be haunted by guilt about that, that a part of him is gonna hate that he had to do it. And he does, because he did genuinely care for Victor, and he's trying to be this hard as nails person who he thinks he has to be. And, like, I'm not saying that he's being set up for a redemption arc by any means. I think, like, you know, like a lot of, these characters, like, he's probably gonna come to a bad end. It's probably gonna be deserved. But I think he genuinely cared for Victor. I think he genuinely thinks that he had to kill Victor, and I think that he's really gonna be wrestling in season 2 or whatever we next get from him with, how does he feel about that?
Yeah, I'm not sure if he'll be
Mhm.
wrestling. I don't know. I agree that that could be an outcome here. I- I would be okay with like a Ghost of Victor character
Mhm.
that he talks to
Yeah.
about it, like to expresses his guilt to that character, but then like outwardly is still acts in the same way. I'm
Yeah.
not sure. I don't even know if we need a season 2 in
That's
this
fair.
case. Like they have set up some interesting things, and certainly like at the end of it we see him adopt the classic penguin
Yep.
suit and top hat, because the council member is like, if you want to be in these circles you got to dress
Right.
better. Like if you want to be respected you got to dress respectfully. And so we see him enter that world, but we don't know yet what he's going to do with it. I think like there are some storylines where he ends up like running for mayor. Oh, that was the
Yeah.
movie.
But I think it's happened in the comics a couple
Batman
of
movie.
times where he plays
Yeah.
a, some sort of role. Gotham, the TV show, played a lot with that idea. Yeah, I think he's supposed to always be the person who lives on the edge of respectability, and he wants respectability, but he's also willing to, like, he it, it's sort of like he sees all the darkness behind these rich people and these elite people, and so he's willing to do it himself, but he's just a lot more, like, outrageous about it, and so he gets rejected, and he doesn't understand that. And it's, he's holding up a mirror, and I think that's one of the most compelling parts about his character.
Yeah, and his disability, like deformity, like his look is part of why they look
Yeah,
down on
very
him.
much so.
Like, that is a part of his story and why, like, the character, like, never fully gains the
Yeah,
respect of the people around him. And, we can say, like, that's not correct, but it is what drives this character and his stories so
yeah,
often.
I think it's really true. We could probably do a bunch more episodes on this, and I think this is going to be a show that we refer to a lot because it touches on a lot of the things we most love to discuss in this podcast. But is there any other kind of last things you want to say? We are going to have some bonus content for members. That's going to specifically be on who are other people in the Batman Rogues Gallery that we would think could benefit from having a show like this, or even maybe some other people's rogue galleries. But for our non-members and for everybody, any last comments you want to make?
Yeah, I wanna like you mentioned, Salvatore Moroni's
Mm-hmm.
wife. She's played by the fantastic Shohreh Aghdashloo, who has just been in, like, everything, and she is one of the best voices, like, female voices
Yep.
in media, and I just love her, and in this, like, as you said, she gets to portray this character, and I believe, like, the subtitles say that she speaks in
Yep.
Farsi, and I'm just gonna trust in that because I do not speak that. But the Maronis like speak to each other like kind of as like their own coded
Mm-hmm.
language so that other people don't listen in and understand what's going on. I thought that was great. Michael Kelly, who we have seen in House of Cards and animated show Pantheon as a
Yep.
fixer. He's a fixer in this. Johnny Viti, he's kind of like the right hand man in the Maroni family. And he is not himself a Maroni. So, like, he is always in this position of close to power, but never in
Yep.
power. And so you think, like, at one point, like, maybe he's going to go for it. And then Sophia just undercuts him. And it's another great, it's another great crime socialism scene where she kills Vidi, and then like basically to the rest of the people in the room is like he was the problem.
Right.
Like he was also hoarding the power. And now like you guys can distribute the power and the money amongst
Right.
yourselves.
One other actor that I really noted. I don't know if you've ever seen this, but the show Entourage, a very fun, very problematic show that's not aged well. But the character of Billy Walsh, people will know. That actor Reese Coiro, is the plays the council member that you mentioned. So that was just a fun connection. That
Oh,
he
okay.
looks so different and acts so different. It took me a few minutes to realize who that was, but
There you go. A very minor role, but I think like if there were to be a season two, a follow-up, I think probably
yeah,
more prominent, excuse me, role. And we didn't even talk about the character of the
yes,
doctor. Dr.
hmm
Rush, who's a doctor in Arkham who is, we'd say, treating Sophia, and they have a relationship, confusing relationship that is not made clear, like whether they are sexual
hmm
partners, but they definitely have a close relationship. And we could have a whole other episode about portrayal of asylums and prisons in
yep,
media, and I think we should because this one is terrible, and it's because it's based on comics
right.
and it's like doesn't have to adhere to reality, but I think it brings up some things that do are paralleled in reality that are bad and should be acknowledged and
Yeah. No,
discussed.
I've said before in this podcast, and I think you're right, it should get a full episode, is that I'm often frustrated by how like the idea of a character being locked up, in a mental institution. I've twice spent times in mental health hospitals and they saved my life and I was very glad for it. And I've also had one very bad experience. And I think a lot of people have had similar, both pro and good and bad. This is Arkham Asylum, though. This is definitely not one of the good ones. And while I believe Dr. Julian Rush is a new character created for this show, if you've seen any other Batman properties where there are strange doctors, often Doctor Strange is one of them, not the
Yeah.
Marvel one, but the one from the DC Comics world, this character will feel familiar. And you're right, he has a very kind of complex relationship with Sophia that I feel in some ways is kind of a fun inversion, and I think somewhat intentional on the Joker Harley one, because in this it's kind of the same idea of the patient is seducing the doctor and like bringing the doctor over to the crazy side, and given the gendering of the Joker Harley relationship, I thought that was a really fun parallel. Um, I think you're right. I think for one, the actor is just amazing. It's Theo Rossi, who people remember either from Sons of Anarchy or from the Daredevil universe.
Mm.
He was a really big part of the Luke Cage shows. And you know, like I would expect that, like, I know Matt Reeves is working on another Batman movie with Robert Pattinson. We might well see him be a character in that. We might see, like, this is not this. Did Matt Reeves write this show? I don't think he did, but I think he was like connected and consulted on it.
Probably a
Yeah,
producer.
yeah, that's right. He was a producer, and so I think this is very intentionally, they're kind of creating their own little micro universe with this show and that movie, and that whether it's a Penguin season 2 or, like I said, a Falcone season or another movie, we're gonna get these. This is all part of the same continuity.
Yeah, the kind of what I've read is that Colin Farrell will appear as a side character in the next Batman movie, and they're kind of talking about a season 2 of the show, but he's reluctant to commit to it because of the makeup requirements.
Yeah, he's
mostly
spending like 5 hours in the chair every day.
Yeah, it's a lot. The primary person cited as executive producer on this is Lauren LaFranc.
Okay.
And Matt Reeves is credited, but it's always hard to tell like how much in something like this. So Lauren LaFranc is the highest billed executive producer, so I think she deserves the most credit here.
Cool. One of the quick things just that the internet is telling me is that and it makes sense that Julian Rush, he's very focused on fear and how fear motivates people, and so there's been some discussion that he could be the person who becomes Scarecrow.
Okay.
So yeah, which would make sense.
That's good. Yeah, not like, I guess we'll talk more about this in our bonus section. But as a general thing, like, I am okay with different origins or like different named characters being these iconic villains. Like, Scarecrow doesn't always have to be Jonathan Crane.
Right.
So
yeah, and this is a whole other story we can talk about, because there's part of me that's kind of frustrated, in part because I'm like, Cillian Murphy played that role so well in the I don't want to say Christian Bale movies again. Who's the director of the Nolan? Yeah, the Nolan movies. But if we're just going to get 8 million versions of Batman, this is certainly a really good one. And this is, of the various DC micro universes that are all maybe tied together somehow in the multiverse, this is certainly one I'm most invested in right now.
Yeah, it's a good one.
Well, thank you. I'm really glad. Like I said, it's been a couple months since I saw the show, but Riki just got back and was like, hey, I watched the show, and we hadn't figured out a topic for today. So this was perfect. Fans, let us know what you think. Would really love to hear your thoughts on the show. We're not going to do like episode by episode coverage of it again, but certainly if there are other major questions from the show that you want to hear us do deeper dives on, I think we really can, especially because we can put it in conversation with some other shows and how we feel about them. Of course, if you want to become a member, it's only $5 a month, $55 a year. All the information's in your show notes. I hope you become a member. We'll have bonus content for the members in just a moment. For everybody else, may the force be with you.